I'm Alara, 29, female, and my life was cleaved in two in the living room I grew up in. It happened the moment my family demanded I sacrifice my future to fix my sister's mistake, a mistake valued at $500,000. They sat there, a tribunal of familiar faces, expecting me to crumble. But it was the words from my own mother, sharp and cold as glass, that finally severed the ties I once thought were unbreakable. The air in the living room was thick with a cloying, expectant silence. It was the same room where I'd opened Christmas presents, hidden during games of hide-and-seek, and cried after scraping my knee. Now, it felt like a courtroom, and I was on trial for the crime of being successful. My sister Kasia sat on the ottoman, her face a mask of practiced distress, tears glinting in her eyes. At 26, she still had the uncanny ability to appear like a fragile doll, even when the chaos surrounding her was entirely of her own making. This time, it was a $500,000 hole blown in her finances, the spectacular failure of her third lifestyle brand in as many years. My mother, Marlena, stood by the fireplace, her posture ramrod straight. As a real estate agent, she was a master of closing deals, and she looked at me with the same predatory focus she applied to a difficult negotiation. "Ilara, it's simple," she began, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Kasia is in trouble, real trouble. The creditors are calling nonstop. We have to do something." My father, Ian, sat in his favorite armchair, his gaze fixed on a random spot on the Persian rug. He was a master of strategic invisibility, a man who could absorb himself into the furniture to avoid a confrontation. My brother, Silas, 28 and perpetually simmering with a resentment he barely bothered to conceal, leaned against the doorframe. A small, cruel smirk played on his lips. He was enjoying this. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Marlena's eyes narrowed. "Don't be naive, your store. The appraiser said it's worth at least $500,000, it's the answer. You sell it, we pay off Kasia's debts, and we can all move on from this nightmare." I felt the air leave my lungs. My store. My beautiful, thriving artisan craft supply store, the Gilded Thread. I had built it from nothing. From a dream sketched on a napkin, funded by the small inheritance my grandfather had left me and nurtured with years of sleepless nights, careful planning, and a love so deep it felt like a part of my own soul. It was more than a business. It was the one place on earth that was truly mine. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "Absolutely not." Kasia let out a sob. "But Ilara, everything will be ruined. My life is over." "You should have thought of that before you took out loans for a curated vibe retreat in Bali that nobody wanted to go to," I said, a flash of anger cutting through my shock. That's when my mother delivered the blow. She took a step forward, her face a mask of cold fury. "Listen to me," she growled, the words slicing through the room. "This family is a house. We all have to hold it up. Kasia is a vital part of this house. She looked me up and down, a lifetime of disapproval in her eyes. "If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse." The words hit me with a physical force. It wasn't just the demand for my store. It was the casual, brutal dismissal of my entire existence. I looked at my family for some sign of dissent. My father continued his intense study of the carpet. Silas's smirk widened. Kasia arranged her face into a look of tragic validation. They all agreed. I was disposable. The support beam that could be kicked out without a second thought. I had spent my entire life feeling like a ghost in this family, but this was the first time they had said it out loud. The favoritism for Kasia wasn't a secret. It was the foundational principle of our household. I remembered her 16th birthday. She, Dee, received a brand new convertible, a reward for simply existing. I, on the other hand, had graduated top of my class in business school a few years later. My celebration was a sheet cake from the grocery store and a card from my mother that read, "Well done. Don't let it go to your head." Silas's jealousy was just as consistent. When I first told them my idea for the Gilded Thread, he had laughed out loud. "A craft store? What are you going to do? Sell glitter and pipe cleaners to old ladies? It's a hobby, Ilara, not a career. You should get a real job like me." He worked in middle management at a company he despised, and my quiet, steady success had become a personal affront to him. He loved my failures and hated my victories, and this moment was, for him, the ultimate victory. And my father, my dear, passive father. I once tried to talk to him about it years ago. I'd found him in the garage, organizing his tools. I'd poured my heart out, explaining how it felt to be constantly overlooked, to have my accomplishments minimized while Cash's every whim was catered to. He just sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. "Don't rock the boat, Alara," he'd said, not meeting my eye. "You know how your mother gets, it's just easier this way." Easier for him, he chose peace over his own daughter. Now, standing in the living room, their faces blurring together into a single entity of judgment, I finally understood. There was no boat to rock. The boat had long since sunk, and I was the only one who hadn't realized I was drowning. A strange calm washed over me. The pain was still there, a hot stone in my chest, but it was accompanied by a chilling clarity. They had shown me exactly who they were. They had told me my value. 0. I looked at my mother, the architect of my pain. I looked at my father, the silent accomplice. I looked at my brother, the gleeful spectator, and my sister, the black hole of need who had started it all. And I nodded. "Okay," I said. The word was a pebble in the vast silence. Marlena's expression softened, mistaking my surrender for agreement. "Good. I'll call the business broker in the morning." I turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. They thought I had given in. They had no idea that I was simply agreeing with their assessment. I would disappear, and they would find out just how wrong they were about which parts of the house were truly holding it up. I walked up the stairs to my old bedroom, the one I'd stayed in on weekends since moving into my own apartment. Each step was heavy, deliberate. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm, like a funeral drum. The shock had given way to a profound and hollow ache, but beneath it, a tiny, cold flame of resolve was kindling. Inside the room, I shut the door, the click of the latch echoing the finality of my decision. I leaned against the wood, closing my eyes. If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse. My mother's voice replayed in my mind, not as a shout, but as a simple statement of fact. To her, I wasn't a daughter, I was a resource, a line of credit, a non-essential component that could be liquidated for the sake of the more valuable asset, Kasha. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the familiar floral comforter offering no comfort. For years, I had operated on a quiet hope. A foolish, stubborn belief that one day they would see me. That if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, became successful enough, their approval would finally follow. I'd imagined a moment where my mother would look at my store, at the happy customers and the beautiful displays, and say, "I'm so proud of you." What a fantasy. All my success had done was make me a fatter pig for the slaughter. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, quiet street. The decision wasn't born of rage or a desire for revenge. It was simpler than that. It was the logical conclusion to a lifetime of evidence. You cannot fix what is fundamentally broken. You cannot earn love from people who see you as a commodity. The only winning move, as the old movie saying goes, is not to play. So I would stop playing. A strange, liberating calm settled over me. There were no more tears to cry. The grief was for a family I had desperately wanted, not the one I actually had. The family I had was a cage, and the door had just been opened. All I had to do was walk out. I pulled my overnight bag from the closet and began to pack, not with panic, but with a methodical precision. I didn't take much. A few changes of clothes, my laptop, the small, worn copy of Pride and Prejudice my grandfather had given me. I opened it, and his inscription on the inside cover met my eyes. "For my Alara, never let anyone convince you that you are anything less than the heroine of your own story." A single, hot tear finally escaped and splashed onto the page. I wiped it away carefully. He was the only one who had ever truly seen me. I went to my desk and pulled out a small, heavy object from the drawer. The key to the safe deposit box at the downtown bank. The box I had opened years ago to store his will and the original stock certificates for my business. I laid it on the polished wood of the desk. Then I opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard. First, an email to my landlord. I was a model tenant, always paid rent on time. I explained that due to a sudden family emergency, I had to terminate my lease. I would forfeit the deposit and pay an additional 2 months' rent as a penalty. I hit send before I could second-guess it. Next, a carefully worded email to Amelia, the fiercely competent and wonderfully kind woman who managed the Gilded Thread. "Amelia," I wrote, "a serious family matter has come up and I need to step away for an indeterminate amount of time. I will be working remotely. All operational decisions are yours. I trust you completely. I will transfer a significant bonus to your account tomorrow. Please protect." Our store, I knew she would. Amelia loved the Gilded Thread almost as much as I did. Finally, I took out a single sheet of notepaper and a pen. My hand was perfectly steady. I wrote only a few words to go with the key, no long, emotional letter. They didn't deserve my emotions. They deserved only the truth, cold and hard as a diamond. I slipped downstairs. The low murmur of the television told me they were still in the living room, probably celebrating their victory, planning how to spend my future. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but it didn't hurt anymore. It was just information. I placed the single key and the folded note in the very center of the polished mahogany table in the entryway, where no one could miss it. I took one last look around at the house that was never a home, at the silent walls that held a universe of painful memories. I opened the front door, stepped out into the cool night air, and pulled it shut behind me without a sound. I didn't look back. I just walked, my small bag over my shoulder, disappearing into the darkness. I had vanished. Now it was up to them to find what I had left behind. The first 24 hours were a blur of motion and anonymity. I drove for 3 hours, heading north, with no destination in mind other than away. The hum of the engine and the long, hypnotic lines of the highway were a balm to my frayed nerves. I ended up in a small, quiet town nestled in a river valley, the kind of place with a single main street and a pace of life that felt a century slower than the city. I checked into a generic motel called the Riverbend Inn. The room was clean, impersonal, and perfect. It smelled of disinfectant and old air conditioning. It was a space with no history, no memories, no ghosts. It was a blank slate. The moment I closed the door and the deadbolt slid home, the adrenaline that had been fueling me for hours finally seeped away, leaving me feeling hollowed out. I sank onto the stiff, polyester bedspread, and the silence of the room rushed in. It was a profound, absolute silence, unlike any I had ever experienced. There was no underlying tension, no need to brace for a passive-aggressive comment or a dismissive sigh. There was just nothing. And in that nothingness, the grief I'd been holding at bay finally washed over me. It was a strange, specific kind of sorrow. I wasn't mourning the loss of Marlena, Ian, Silas, or Kasia. I was mourning the family I had spent 29 years pretending they were. The mother who would hug me and say she was proud. The father who would stand up for me. The siblings who would be my friends. I was grieving a fantasy. Acknowledging that the fantasy was dead was both heartbreaking and exquisitely freeing. I let myself cry then, a raw, silent cascade of tears for the little girl who tried so hard, for the young woman who never felt good enough. When the tears finally subsided, I felt scoured clean, but not empty. There was a space inside me now, a space that had once been filled with desperate hope and constant anxiety. Now it was mine to fill with whatever I chose. The next morning, I woke up with the sun. Instead of the familiar dread of a family interaction, I felt a quiet sense of purpose. I was the heroine of my own story now, and heroines had to be smart. I sat at the small particle board desk with my laptop and a cup of surprisingly decent motel coffee. First, I secured my life. I logged into my bank accounts, changing every password. I transferred the promised bonus to Amelia, along with enough operating capital to run the store for 6 months without any input from me. I set up alerts for any major transactions. Then, I did something I should have done years ago. I researched lawyers who specialized in corporate law and harassment. I found a highly rated firm and scheduled a virtual consultation for the following day, wanting to know my rights if my family tried to interfere with my business. Finally, I dealt with the practicalities of being a ghost. I had my mail forwarded to a new P.O. box. I bought a new, untraceable pay-as-you-go phone and number. I kept my old phone, but I turned it off and tucked it into the bottom of my bag. It was a link to a life I no longer lived. That afternoon, I walked down the town's main street. I bought a new sweater at a local shop, chose a novel from a dusty used bookstore, and sat at a small cafe with a view of the river. As I sipped a latte, I watched a flock of geese take flight from the water, their powerful wings beating in unison as they soared into the wide-open sky. A sense of peace, so foreign it was almost jarring, settled deep in my bones. This was what it felt like to not be constantly on edge, to breathe without my chest feeling tight, to exist without having to justify my existence. My mother's words came back to me, but they had lost their power to wound. If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse. I smiled a small, sad smile. She was wrong. The house had been collapsing for years, groaning under the weight of her cruelty, my father's weakness, my brother's jealousy, and my sister's insatiable need. I hadn't been a non-essential part of it. I had been the main load-bearing wall, the one propping up the whole rotten structure. And I had just walked away. The collapse was inevitable. I could picture the scene so clearly in my mind, a movie playing out in the theater of my imagination. The next morning in my family's home would have started with irritation. Marlena, waking up expecting me to be pliant and ready to sign whatever documents she'd already prepared, would find my bed unslept in. She'd call my name, her voice sharp with impatience. Silence. She'd check my room, my bag would be gone, annoyance would curdle into anger. "She's throwing a tantrum," she'd announce to my father, who would retreat further into his morning paper. "She'll be back by dinner, begging for forgiveness." But then one of them, probably my father, on his way out the door, would see it. The single, brass key and the folded note, sitting in the middle of the entryway table, impossible to ignore. He'd pick it up confused. "What's this?" Marlena would snatch it from him. She'd read the note. My handwriting, clear and simple. "The answers you're looking for are here." Confusion would give way to a flicker of greed. A key? To what? Money I'd hidden? A secret apartment? Kasia would insist it must lead to a secret stash of cash. Silas would scoff, claiming it was just another one of my dramatic games. But Marlena, ever the pragmatist, would recognize the name of the bank engraved on the key's head. The downtown branch. Their curiosity, a toxic blend of suspicion and avarice, would be piqued. I imagined them driving to the bank, the mood in the car tense. Marlena would be in charge, of course, striding up to the counter and demanding access to the safe deposit box. There would be a delay. A manager would be called. Forms would have to be signed, my absence questioned. Marlena would steamroll them with a story about a family emergency, her voice dripping with authority. Finally, a bank employee would lead them into the vault. The air would be cool and silent. They would be led to a small metal door. The employee would use their key, then insert mine and turn. The lock would click, a sound of finality. The long metal box would slide out. It would feel heavier than they expected. They would be shown to a private viewing room. Marlena would place the box on the table, a glint in her eye. Kasia would lean forward, practically vibrating with anticipation. Silas would feign disinterest, but his eyes would be locked on the box. My father would just look tired. Marlena would lift the lid. The first thing they'd see would be the binder. It wasn't what they were expecting. It was thick, black, and meticulously organized. The cover page, printed in a clean, bold font, read, "A history of unsecured loans and financial support provided to Kasia Hale, 2016 present." Marlena might try to dismiss it, to push it aside, but Silas, his curiosity getting the better of him, would pick it up. He'd flip a page, then another. His smug expression would slowly begin to dissolve, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. Inside, I had documented everything. Every single time Kasia had come to me for money. The $5,000 to launch her first blog in 2016. The $10,000 to cover her rent for 6 months after she quit a job in 2018. The $25,000 for her jewelry-making startup in 2020, complete with scanned copies of her desperate text messages and my polite, fruitless requests for repayment. Page after page of bank transfers, receipts, and broken promises. The grand total, excluding the current $500,000 disaster, came to just over $78,000. It was a damning, undeniable record of her pattern of reckless spending and my pattern of foolish generosity. Beneath the binder was a single, sealed envelope, yellowed with age. My mother's name was not on it. My father's was not on it. It was addressed to me in my grandfather's spidery, elegant script. Marlena would tear it open, her movements jerky. She would start to read it aloud, her voice confident at first, then faltering as she took in the words. "My dearest Alara," it would begin. "If you are reading this, it means the day I feared has come. I am leaving you the entirety of my savings. Not because you are my grandchild, but because you are the only one I trust to do something wise with it. You have a good head on your shoulders, a creator's heart, and a quiet strength your family consistently fails to see." Marlena's voice would drop to a whisper. "I want you to use this money to build something for yourself. Something that is yours and yours alone. Be warned, my girl. Your mother's love is conditional and your father's courage is thin. They will see your success not as something to celebrate, but as a resource for your cyst. Our Kasia is a whirlwind of charm and carelessness. Do not let her pull you into her storm. Your brother, Silas, is consumed by a bitterness he may never overcome. Do not let it poison you." The final lines would be the ones to break her. They will try to tell you that your value lies in what you can do for them. Do not believe it. Your value is inherent. You are the steady hand, the quiet heart, the one who builds things that last. Never forget that. Build your life, Alara, and protect it fiercely. I can see it so clearly. The letter trembling in Marlena's hand, the binder of evidence lying open on the table. The truth, stark and unavoidable, filling the small, silent room. Kasia's face, pale and horrified, as she realized there was no secret fortune, only a record of her greed. Silas, his smirk finally, blessedly wiped from his face, replaced by a dawning shame. My father, Ian, looking at the letter as if it were a ghost, the full weight of his passive betrayal crashing down on him. And my mother, Marlena? Her power, her authority, her entire narrative of my worthlessness, shattered by the words of her own father. She would be left staring at the proof of a deception that was far older and deeper than just one evening's argument. She had not only betrayed her daughter, she had betrayed her father's final wish. The house of cards she had built had just been blown down by a voice from the grave. In my new town, life began to take on a gentle, pleasing rhythm. I found a small cottage to rent on the edge of town, with a garden that needed tending and a porch swing that looked out over a field of wildflowers. I spent my days managing the gilded thread remotely, a task made easy by Amelia's competence. We communicated via email and video calls, and the business was flourishing. I designed new crafting kits inspired by the natural beauty around me, the deep greens of the forest, the silver of the river, the fiery orange of the sunsets. The store had never been more profitable. My energy, no longer consumed by family drama, was pouring into my passion, and it was thriving. I often found myself thinking about the aftermath of the bank vault discovery. I pictured them driving home in suffocating silence, the binder and the letter sitting on the seat between them like a bomb. I imagined the scene at the house, the carefully constructed facade of their family finally imploding. There would be accusations. Kasia, weeping, would accuse me of trying to humiliate her. Silas, deflecting his own shame, would probably call me cruel and calculating. My father, Ian, for the first time, might find a sliver of his voice, turning to Marlena with a look of dawning horror. You hid this from us, from her. And Marlena, stripped of her authority, would have no defense. How could she justify hiding her own father's letter? How could she explain away the meticulously documented proof of Kash's exploitation? Her power had always relied on controlling the narrative, on defining my role as the ungrateful, disposable daughter. The letter and the ledger had incinerated that narrative. She would be left with nothing but the ugly truth. About a month after my departure, the first attempt at contact came. It was an email from Sila's that slipped through my spam filter. The subject line was simply Ilara. My hand trembled as I opened it. It wasn't the angry tirade I expected. It was something far stranger. I read the letter, he wrote, and the binder. I had no idea about the money you gave her, about what Grandpa thought. Mom is a wreck. She won't leave her room. Dad just sits in the garage. Kasha is trying to sell her car. The creditors are calling the house now. It's a mess. You've torn this family apart. I hope you're happy. I read the last two sentences 3 times. You've torn this family apart. I hope you're happy. He still didn't get it. He saw the truth, but he still blamed me for exposing it. He wasn't angry that they had been cruel. He was angry that their cruelty had been brought into the light and that there were now consequences. The house was collapsing, and he was blaming the support beam for walking away instead of the termites that had been eating it from the inside out for 30 years. A year ago, that email would have devastated me. It would have sent me spiraling into guilt and self-doubt. Now, I felt only a profound, detached sadness. I saw his words for what they were, a desperate attempt to shift the blame, to make me responsible for the wreckage they had created. I didn't reply. I simply dragged the email to the trash and permanently blocked his address. I was not a character in their drama anymore. I was the audience who had walked out of the theater. My healing wasn't a straight line. There were days when a wave of loneliness would wash over me, a pang of sorrow for the connections I would never have. But I learned to sit with those feelings, to acknowledge them, and then to let them go. I focused my energy on building, not grieving. I tended my garden, coaxing roses and lavender from the soil. I made friends in town, the warm, chatty owner of the bookstore, the quiet, kind man who ran the local cafe. I joined a hiking group and explored the wooded trails that crisscrossed the valley. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who liked me for me. Not for what I could provide, not for the role I could play, but for my quiet humor, my passion for creating, my love of old books. I was building a new house, a new life, on a foundation of respect and genuine affection. And this one felt strong enough to weather any storm. Nearly a year had passed. Autumn had arrived, painting the valley in brilliant strokes of gold, red, and orange. I had settled into my new life so completely that my old one felt like a story I'd read about someone else. The Gilded Thread had its best year ever, and I was even scouting locations for a potential second store in a nearby city. I was happy. Truly, peacefully happy. One crisp Saturday afternoon, I was at the local farmer's market, my basket filled with apples and a loaf of fresh sourdough, when I heard a hesitant voice call my name. Ilara. The voice was so familiar it sent a jolt through my system. I turned slowly, my heart thudding against my ribs. It was my father. Ian stood there, looking smaller and older than I remembered. His shoulders were stooped, his face was etched with lines of weariness, and his eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a deep, bottomless sadness. He wasn't angry, he looked defeated. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "I hired a man," he said quietly, his gaze dropping to the pavement. "A private investigator. It took him 3 months to find you. Your mother, she doesn't know I'm here." We stood in silence for a moment, the cheerful chatter of the market swirling around us. "She's not the same," he continued, as if speaking to himself. "The letter, it broke something in her. She sold the house, said it had too many memories. She and Kasha are in a small apartment now. Kasha had to declare bankruptcy. She's working as a waitress, hates it." He paused. "Sila's moved out, barely speaks to any of us." He was delivering a report on the demolition of the house he had refused to protect. There was no triumph in hearing it, only a hollow echo of what could have been. "Why are you telling me this, Dad?" He finally looked at me, and I saw a flicker of the man I had always wished he could be. There were tears in his eyes. Because I was a coward, Alara. My whole life, I chose the path of least resistance. I let Marlena rule the house because it was easier than fighting. I let her belittle you and build up Kasia because standing up to her was terrifying. I saw the unfairness, and I looked away. His voice cracked. "Her father, your grandfather, he saw it all. He tried to protect you, and I let your mother steal that from you." I sat there in that bank and read that letter, and it was like my whole life was laid bare as a failure. Not just as a husband, but as a father. This was the conversation I had longed for my entire life. The apology, the acknowledgement, but hearing it now, I didn't feel the rush of absolution I once thought I would. The wound was too old, the scar too thick. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, and I meant it. It took a kind of courage he'd never shown before to stand here and admit this. But it doesn't change anything. "I know," he whispered. "I don't expect it to. I don't expect you to come back. I had to say it. I had to tell you that I see it now, I see you. And I am so sorry." I looked at this man, my father, a stranger etched with familiar features. I saw his pain, his regret, his weakness. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt a quiet, profound pity. He had been trapped, too, in a cage of his own making. "I'm happy here, Dad," I told him, my voice soft but firm. "I have a good life, I have friends, my business is thriving, I'm at peace." I reached out, and for the first time in over a decade, I placed my hand on his arm. His flannel shirt was soft. "I hope you find some peace, too, I really do, but my life is here now. That door is closed. For my own sake, it has to be." He nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the lines on his cheek. "I understand," he said. "Be well, Alara, be happy." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the market crowd. I stood there for a long moment, the heavy basket of apples in my hand. I did not feel a sense of victory or revenge. I felt a quiet, solemn sense of liberation. The final chain had been broken. I had not offered him forgiveness because some things cannot be forgiven, but I had offered him peace, and in doing so, had secured my own. I was finally, completely free. 2 years later, I stood on a ladder in the middle of a bright, airy SB. Ace, the scent of fresh paint and sawdust filling my nose. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. This was the future. This was the gilded thread, location number 2. Life had moved on in the most beautiful, unexpected ways. My new home was filled with the laughter of friends. My garden was an explosion of color. My world, once so small and tense, had expanded to encompass mountains to hike, cities to explore, and people who cherished my presence. My business had become more than a source of income. It was a testament to my resilience. The Gilded Thread wasn't just a store that sold yarn, fabric, and beads. It was a community hub, a place where people came to learn to create, to turn raw materials into something beautiful and strong through patience, skill, and love. It was a metaphor for my own life, a life I had crafted with my own 2 hands out of the messy, tangled threads of my past. I rarely thought of my family anymore. They existed as distant figures in a past I had survived. I heard through a cousin that Marlena and Kasia's relationship had grown strained, their shared apartment a pressure cooker of resentment. Sila's, apparently, was in therapy, trying to untangle the knots of bitterness that had defined him. My father lived alone, quietly. I wished them no ill will. I simply didn't wish them at all. They were no longer a part of my story. My mother's cruel words, once a dagger to my heart, now felt like a prophecy I had thankfully fulfilled. I had disappeared from their collapsing house, and in doing so, I had saved myself. Sometimes, when I'm locking up the store at night, I think of my grandfather and his letter. He had more faith in me than I had in myself. He saw the heroine in me before I knew how to be one. He knew that my value was not in what I could give to others, but in what I could build for myself. My life wasn't a fairy tale. The scars were still there, faint white lines on my soul, but they no longer ached. They were just a reminder of the battle I had won, the battle for my own self-worth. I learned that sometimes, walking away is the strongest and most loving thing you can do. You cannot force people to value you. You can only choose to value yourself enough to leave if they don't. I was no longer a supporting character in someone else's tragedy. I was the author, the narrator, and the hero of my own story. And the best chapters were still unwritten. So, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have sold the store to keep the peace, or would you have walked away as I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human, navigating the complex tapestry of relationships and expectations. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. It might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.